Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Like Clockwork. This is a podcast of Chicago Filmmakers. For those of you who don't know, Chicago Filmmakers is a not-for-profit organization in the city of Chicago. We're celebrating our 50th year as an organization, and we are the producers of the upcoming Onion City Experimental Film Festival and Reeling, the Chicago LGBTQ plus International Film Festival. And we do many other things, for instance, workforce training through our production assistant training program. We hold classes here at 1326 West Hollywood Avenue in Chicago and online. Tomorrow, we're also hosting the first free Queer Writers Club, which you can sign up still for free. It's going to meet every month, and that's an initiative also of Reeling. I'm really excited to bring this podcast to you today. First, actually, I'm going to pass it over to Paige to give a brief introduction, then to Sonnie, then to Saint and Sage. And afterwards, if you've followed the podcast at all, each one of our guests will go over what they do, a topic that represents their practice or is tangentially related to their practice, and what makes them tick. So Paige, I'll start with you.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Paige Taul. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Originally from California, but living and working in Chicago, and I love it here. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey Paige. I'm Sonnie Wooden, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm from Chicago, born and raised here. Went to school, tried not to come back. Now I'm back. So it's good to be here with y'all too.
Hello, I'm Sage Otuma, pronouns he, him, his. It's an honor to be here with all three of you.
I'm St. Piñero. My pronouns are they, them, and you didn't say where you're from. I'm from Staten Island, New York.
I'm from Minnesota originally.
Now, before I pass on to Paige, in order to for Paige to give her topic presentation, I will say that Saint and Sage are the creators of Film Diary New York City. So not only is this, for real, not only is this a very Chicago-based episode because Paige and Sonnie and myself are based in Chicago, but also we are all alumni of the amazing Film Diary, which feels like it's been going on forever, but it's actually a relatively new endeavor, one of the most important film festivals, especially for experimental and documentary work. So it's really lovely to join those folks together. But also, Paige is the juror for the upcoming Onion City Experimental Film Festival. So there's many different ways in which we're all tied together here. With that being said, I am going to hand the mic off to you, Paige.
Awesome. So in thinking about, in large part, what makes me tick or what sort of drives my practice, I think I'm always searching for a certain kind of specificity, a specificity in language that I'm using to describe myself, or my identity, specificity in form. How am I, translating these questions I have about self and identity into something visible, tangible in a different way. And I think especially with how long I've been making work and the plans that I have to continue to make work, I'm always looking for ways to be more specific. Like, how can I even talk about my work in a way that gets closer to how I feel about the work, something like that. And I think even that gap is interesting. Like, what does it mean to make a work that maybe is outside of or beyond sort of what I initially wanted to do with a particular piece. I think especially with my work being about identity, so I do a lot of work in thinking about familial relationships, how they shape one's identity or how they shape my identity specifically, but also community formed or community based experiences that also help form an identity. And in my case, I'm thinking about Blackness. So where did my definition of what Blackness is and what it looks like, where did that come from? How is it cultivated in the spaces that I spend time in or the people that I spend time with? And how is it changing, right? Like even the language used to describe Blackness is ever evolving. Negro, African American, Black, POC, by POC. And I think that kind of that flexibility is huge. And I think I'm also looking for that same kind of flexibility or self-determination in the form also. And I think earlier you asked about like analog motivations, I think, or reasons for continuing to use this particular material when digital is so readily available. I think it has a lot to do with my interest in the economy of storytelling. So how in one role, for example, how can you sort of get to the beginning, middle, and end of a story, or beginning, middle, and end of a defining event, or defining action or memory, something like that. So I think that has a lot to do with my material interests at the same time. I do also make work with found material and recently some digital stuff, but definitely really interested in found material, thinking about that flexibility. Like, what does it mean to like lift a made material, a made clip or a made film and recontextualize it? Like, how can I find my specificity within something else that was determined outside of my means of production? So I think that's what's I guess driving me, at least how I'm thinking about it most recently, in like looking over my artist statement. Like, what are ways that I can have something get closer to what I feel like the work is doing, and then also balance what the work is doing or isn't doing, and thinking about the future of that. I guess that's kind of big. Maybe I should narrow that scope a little bit. But as far as most recent work, I think even in being able to rewatch certain things that I've made in the past, like something that's 5 years old or 6 years old, and being able to not redefine, but being able to find new meaning or different meaning in what I felt like a film I made did, or what I still think it does, stuff like that. So I think that's that's what's driving my work in a larger sense. Is looking for a certain kind of specificity, both in form and in language, and the language in describing the form, and all the other sort of avenues that come from that, come from the way that becomes complicated. I think that's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Paige. I'm gonna hand it over to Sonnie.
What makes me tick in like my practice and my work, I don't know. It's hard for me to start this because my buddy Princeton has been telling me to read like Afro-pessimism, and I refuse to read it sometimes because I feel like it's too dark, or like it's too sad, or I'm scared to find myself in it. But I think, that being said, I think much of my work is coming from the place of like the backdrop or the setting or the environment that is like the West, and just trying to understand like where we are as Black people in that conversation, in that culture, people without a flag, people without resources in a real way at times. And it helps me organize all of the, like, one, the atrocities, and two, the beauty, and being able to say, okay, how can I parse through all these things and just communicate? And the communication aspect of like Blackness, I think, linguistically, there's just so much that's like misunderstood. So I just kind of, I don't even like sometimes feel like an artist, you know, or a filmmaker. But a lot of the time, I feel like someone who's running around trying to pick up the pieces that some people have discarded and saying, "Oh my God, like we got to save this Soldier Boy interview from the Breakfast Club because Soldier Boy did break the internet and innovate in a way that we didn't understand at the time, you know." And then Drake did steal his flow, but I try to I try to reach back, and I think before I got out of grad school, I was like a little bit more considerate in the ways I thought about it, and now I feel like I'm just removing a lot of like these kind of like proxies to like myself. That's actually the work. So I really want to be in the work. I like being observational. Me being on the spectrum, it gives me a way to communicate. Also my feelings. It's an instrument. It feels like I can play like jazz or something like Miles Davis just a little bit, even though I'll probably never be as good as Miles Davis. But it's a vehicle for expression, of course. But I think when it comes down to my artist statement, you know, when Paige said artist statement, I was like, oh my God, and I had to think about mine, and you know, think about macroeconomics, culture and class, and always being like a fish out of water. But my day job is in advertising as well, so I've I've just been pulled and tussled in all these ways. So it's my practice is like something that saves me every time, every single time. But it's also my way to give back, and you know, in a Gordon Parks way, is also a choice of my weapon. In an Arthur Jafa way, it's you know this way to really push the bounds of blackness, and like a Daughters of the Dust way is like about beauty, or you know like a like a Spike Lee way, it's just a one to educate without even trying to educate. So yeah, I think what makes me tick is always the hard questions of like how to save black people. Yeah, I think about that every day. I think about how to like own um our stuff, you know, how there's something about black people in art and design that we can't even fathom at some days, and that always has me thinking. And seeing like my contemporaries and like the art space and the design space and especially in the music spaces, I see them doing things, and it always pushes me forward. So I think a lot of my references have been like more about pop culture these days, and it's really starting to ooze out of me in a way. Like, you know, I told my friend Zora that Pop Smoke was the Steve Jobs of drill music, you know? So trying to find all these like disparate connections between titans of industry and like maybe a rapper or well, I feel like that's not a good thing to say rapper, but artist Pop Smoke, because he is one and was one. But yeah, yeah, it's my safe space in short. It's the only thing that won't hit me back, right? Or try to hit me. So I can sit within it and think and be still. But yeah, I'm not very good at talking about myself like that. I'm better at questions, but I'll stop. And I'm looking at myself, which is wild. So yeah.
I would say that both of you have just generated for me like literally pages worth of notes just
Oh,
hearing you.
yeah.
So please feel
Both of you have
like
set the bar way too high because
really high.
we did not come with a prepared
Also, should we
anything.
talk about ourselves as individuals or as an item, as film diary?
Well, I would say this. You can both talk about yourselves as however you feel. So if you want to start as individuals and then work into film diary, then feel free, or vice versa. I think that you both actually have quite a bit from the perspective of individual artists as well, given that you know that your practices are well established that way. But together, obviously, you've given a lot in terms of curatorship and community building to think about. So however you want to start, please roll with it, because I know it's only going to be good.
Maybe we can start as individuals, because that kind of leads into the origin of Film Diary.
You go
I know,
first.
Saint, if you want to start.
You go first.
Yeah, we both came from a place of personal documentation, memoir, and the art that has always moved us the most was people talking about themselves and their own lives, which doesn't seem like that deep, but it seemed like there wasn't really a showcase specifically for people making work about themselves. A lot of the experimental film showcases were like, some of it would be mixed in, but it would be more geared towards like formally experimental work, or just the more abstract experimental work. And then on the other side of it, the documentary showcases were showing traditional documentary films, which were a different thing. And even if they were coming from the first person perspective, they weren't bringing like, as Paige and Sonnie were talking about, like the artist's own language and the artist's own perspective in that way. And we were just seeing a lot of cool work from friends and in like gallery settings more, and just wanted to do a showcase around personal documentary. And so we say, now I'm jumping straight into Film Diary.
You jumped straight into Film Diary at the beginning. That wasn't really about you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I would like, we both take photos and film our lives, and that was kind of where we came from.
Listen, Sonnie and Paige, it wasn't fair for you two to go first. I guess I'll just kind of try to talk about myself. I try not to like think about my practice, because I feel like when I think about it too much, I end up not making the art because I get really nervous and I hold myself back. But I think with my photography and my writing specifically, I like come from a place of like rage and am very influenced by my trauma, specifically like my family's generational trauma, and kind of how that hindered me growing up. And I didn't find the arts until later in life because of that. And I feel like I use photography and writing now as like a way, photography specifically, as like a way to find my, like where I belong, kind of as a, you know, mixed race queer person who's non-binary. Kind of, I exist like in this very gray area and don't really feel like I fit anywhere. So I use photo and film and all these things to find where I belong. And then when we met, I was really struggling to finish my bachelor's degree because I was working 2 jobs and I just couldn't figure it out. And I finally went back to school, and then this like Film Diary kind of came from like our distaste and everything being so heavily academic and all that overlap.
Yeah.
And
that's the other thing is, just trying to break out of like the kind of academic nonprofit establishment grip on the artist film world, because so much of the more interesting work that we were seeing was more like outsider art, video. Like we're just like saturated in videos right now, and we were bored by a lot of what was getting celebrated.
was that good? Sorry. I'm really nervous now.
No, it's absolutely like what I'll say is normally what I'll do is I'll start to tie it up. But if you want, or if anybody wants to jump in and respond to that first, or you can also continue. I would say that the dynamic of hearing you both speak about this actually, and finding the roots of what became Film Diary speaks a lot about your own practices, but also how this say amazing endeavor of community building is generated. And yet also, don't get me wrong, you've brought up so many different topics that I will have a lot of fun chasing down to in a second.
I also wanted to say it's such an honor to be with Paige Taul, Sonnie Wooden, and M. Woods, three of our favorite filmmakers that have shown in the festival. We were super honored to have Paige in the first year's festival. And yeah, we screened 2 of her films on opening night, and it was like a highlight of that program for sure.
And Sonnie came with the right energy right away. Sonnie was like, I'm all in this. Like, you
Yeah,
know, you don't have to.
We did a program at Millennium Film Workshop called Godspeed that was named for Sonnie's film Godspeed, which is such an incredible example of diary filmmaking. Like, one of our favorite films. It's like a true diary and just incredible film. And then M. Wood's film, Commodity Trading, probably the best experimental feature made in the year 2022. Just incredible. I can't even describe your film because there's a lot going on, but it's a brilliant film. So yeah, just to be with this group of filmmakers is really an honor.
And it's an honor to be with y'all. I don't see y'all enough, so this is incredible, you know. But yeah, shout out everybody. Paige, good to see you too. I'm glad we getting acquainted. Woods, I'm like, you just an email for a little while, you know. I'm just like, you just an email. But it's good to see y'all, and like, yeah, I appreciate that. I do. I got a question for Paige. Can I ask a quick question, Paige? Yeah, when you made the decision to go like kind of all in with analog, like what was that like? Like I have a Super 8 that's still like cartridge still undeveloped, and I just refuse to look at any of it. Like I don't know what it is. I'm scared and all that, but I'm looking for courage and leadership. You know.
I had a professor that changed my life. He, Kevin Jerome Everson. He's an he's a analog giant, and yeah, that's what I learned on first, and digital came second. But I think it made me a better shooter because the stakes were higher, and things felt more precious. And I think because of that, it made me treat the content just as preciously. Like I think, yeah, there's a freedom in being able to shoot a bunch of digital material and then see it as you're shooting it. It's a relief to see it as you're doing it. But there's something, yeah, that I think it made me a better, I don't want to say storyteller, but I think it definitely made me treat the content differently in relation to how I was shooting the material. And then later with shooting digital or getting more comfortable shooting digitally, I find myself also like still trying to have that care and not assuming that it's limitless, even though it can feel sort of limitless in having like digital stuff, SD cards or whatever. But yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with the material itself. So the last film I made, the reason it is digital is because the film it's in reference to a documentary that came out in the 60s, or I think it's 58 specifically, and it's black and white analog. That's been digitized, and I use that as found material, but I needed the part that I was making to be a modern black and white. Like the material needed to be in conversation with this documentary I was referencing, aside from just the topic of what it was about. So that's why I shot that digitally. It was because it had something very specific. It was a comment on the materiality of the original source. As far as, yeah, I mean, in the future or what I'm doing now, I like to test myself. So have I shot anything with a really low shutter speed? No, not yet. So I'll do that in the future. Or have I made a film that's over 20 minutes? No, not yet, but I'll get there one day because that's a lot. But that's one of the things that I'm starting to do, or have been doing, I guess, for a while, in thinking about my relationship to the material. Yeah, what is are you making a comment on the era of the footage, on the era of the content? It can also be timeless. Like, I think there's something that it can make it feel removed from time in a way. So that's also another thing in thinking about film, or even having it be in color or not.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you. I don't. My second film, Guillotine, that was all kind of found footage, and yeah, it was made in the middle of the pandemic, and I was just like, oh shit, like how do I make a film, and like I didn't know what I was doing. But right after Godspeed and before Guillotine, I had picked up that Super 8, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this out and do this thing. But yeah, I still haven't worked up the courage, but yeah, I want to. And that's like me saying a long-winded thank you for sharing that story.
It's only the first time once, and then you're in it.
Okay, yeah, I'll pick it up.
Sonny, I'm curious about your transition from Godspeed to Guillotine, because they're very different films in terms of the methods that you used. But yeah, having like only seen Godspeed and then seeing Guillotine, I was blown away.
Yeah, thank you. I was in grad school and I was angry. I was in grad school and I was angry because I I had so many difficulties with like class and the world and being a black male and like and then also being a straight black male in the art world, and I was just like I couldn't, and I was away from Chicago, and like the kind of slang wasn't there and like the jokes weren't there, so I was just like, what's happening here? And at that time I kind of discovered Arthur Jafa, and I was just like, oh my god, this dude is talking like a friend and an uncle all at the same time, and I was like, okay, he's familiar. And he had made this piece called the White Album, and I've never seen the White Album. I was like, okay, but there's a history of like jazz musicians making pieces on pieces they never heard before. And I was just like, okay, and I've always kind of associated, like music and film as a framing device, and also as like the similar worlds. Like I feel like the way photographers and filmmakers used to hang out, like rappers and fashion designers kind of hang out now. It's like they kind of feature one another. And I saw that video, this like that white dude just being super unapologetically like, just like, why wouldn't black people be mad? Kind of vibe. And I was like, okay, well, in his film, he didn't play the whole thing. And I was like, no, 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 you need to play this whole thing, because it felt so much like a public service announcement. And I was like, okay, like that being in the white cube with that kind of audience viewing it, they're like, then I just start to think about like, okay, what if we just remove like the black hand and see what happens, right? But we like replace me with like, or like the representation of like an ambassador to like stop, right? Because I don't know, I feel like I've experienced in corporate America where I see like a guy say something and then a woman say something and she's right, and then like no one listens to her, and then like, well, I'm like, what? And then her friend will say it for her, and then they listen, and I'm like, okay, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can kind of like do that. And it's in the middle of the pandemic, and I think this is around Ahmaud Arbery. So I mean, I was only, that's like all I could think about, like in my subconscious. But then everybody was like so shaken up about Ahmaud Arbery, and I remember I had a crit about it, and I was like pretty upset, but I had to go to my crit, and I was just like, it's just gonna happen again. And I was like, I just only made this because I know it's gonna happen again, and we need to like not be surprised every time. Like, this is just what is going to happen, right? This is the kind of environment in which we live in that you may not live in, but I live in. So in that time, I was being ultra competitive because I was like, okay, I need to make a film. And I just went to YouTube and I just start thinking about all these clips that I saw of, like, Black men stepping, like these moments of solidarity. And then I would see these other moments of, like, like this, like, white woman, like, talking about, like, finding, like, fetishizing Black men and sexualizing them, and like these, like, weird points of tension. But then there's this point with the dog, and I was watching the film The Pianist with Adrian Brody, and it was when he was playing the tune to the Nazi general, and he, like, saved his life that way. And that whole film's kind of framed around that one scene, because I felt like that was, like, the instrument I was playing. It was just like, it was like a please stop, but in a whisper. Um, and then, yeah, I was just really hopeful that I could make something that felt familiar as well, because people are on social media so much, and the kind of atrocities, like, you'll be swiping, and you don't know what you're going to get. And that lack of safety that I felt on social media is the same kind of lack of safety I felt in the real world. So no one really knows what's coming in that film, which is like, it's like inciting incident after another, and then I give you a second with the dog, and then there's, like, some Black dudes laughing at some Baltimore cops because they got permits for their guns, right? But then I'm also trying to educate, like, a low-key Jay-Z bar, where I'm like, if you got a permit, you good. You know what I mean? Just get the permit. So it was like one of those moments. But yeah, I think I feel like I felt I feel kinship to the notion of rage. Um, so yeah, it came out of a place of, like, deep sadness that just turned to anger, and I feel like I just had to, like, protest in my way. Yeah. Damn, that was dreary. So-
No, that's proper. I mean, I feel like a lot of what makes the particular type of work that would, for instance, be curated by Film Diary, um, what it is, and also not, um, as you were saying, stuck to the sort of formal, compositional, and frankly, very white patriarchal past of experimental film and documentation, is the truth that it oftentimes does have to look into more than dreary but atrocious realities, right, that bind um, um, collective identities that are not those that were, say, exalted by things like the Anthology Film Archive's Essential Cinemas. And there's a good amount of sort of anger and rage that one feels, not only based upon the ways in which these supposed communities were set up with gatekeeping structures, were set up for academic, not for profit, as you were saying, but institutional frameworks. But the way in which those things were purposefully set up as also formal techniques that are meant to, in many ways, remove and say declassify elements of those who are making the best work, or who are speaking in some of the more provocative truths from film goers who would otherwise be upset by, or would be turned by being spectator to these
Yeah.
truths. Now, what you're also saying, though, is absolutely true. At the same time, the commercial scroll in no way gives any care to those who are looking at it. It just assumes that the things that we see in a traumatic unfolding are not going to be affecting the majority of the people who are looking at those scrolls. And so, from that perspective as well, there is an algorithmic racism and a sort of white supremacy simply built into that which is allowed through when these intense forms of assault and violence and murder are allowed through for the sense of spectacular capitalism and driving reactions and engagement, despite the fact that it's also psychologically warfare. And yet that psychological warfare, of course, it begins outside and then it continues on this totally inside sphere of that media warping. And in many ways, I think that actually makes me think about the preciousness of the material that Paige is talking about, how the analog in that way, this sort of economy of the way in which one, through a camera or through the glance, or even if it's the economy of how much that film costs, what the cost is of each frame of represented value, makes one more conscious of, or more, let's say, aware of the things that are then captured in the space. And we say things like captured in the space of the volume that's being represented. And yet at the same time, I also find interesting too, which Paige expanded on, and which you see in Godspeed, your film, Sonnie, is the way in which digital economy is still something that can take on some of these principles. So in Sonnie's work, Godspeed, for instance, what I note is that although a camera is allowed, let's say, a freedom to record more of those moments, it does speak to what you're saying about your practice, that you're looking for the things that might otherwise be discarded because they hold within them a sort of revelatory truth, right? They have moments that would otherwise be, say, taken apart and left on a cutting room floor, while in Godspeed, the jazz to which you were speaking of before, of when you're say achieving at your best, that you feel as though it's like a sort of Miles Davis. To me, that actually comes through quite significantly in the work, because there's a beauty to which everything is threaded together. It's given a freedom, and yet it's not, say, over emphasizing the idea of being able to endlessly capture. There's not really an endless capture, because it is always still from a particular fixed perspective. It's also knowing what it is that you've experienced that has such value that would otherwise, say, be discarded. So just kind of going off of those things, not even really thinking about the notes that I've been taking as I've been listening to you all in conversation, I find that there's something really there about what it is to be in front of, or to be observing of, the specificities, as Paige was saying, of one's being, of one's perception, and holding that as value, as opposed to devaluing and saturating it with non-significance or the insignificance of a particular algorithm as a means of sorting.
Yeah. No, that's why I kind of asked Paige the question about the film, like why on actual film? Because like for my photography work, it's all film, but when it comes to like any sort of camera work with like cinema, I'm just like so freaked out. Like I can't handle it, and I think it's just some. It also goes back to like my kind of experience with like with digital, and also my experience with like um, trying to make a film on like film. Like it's just like I feel like it feels so much more true, but I'm so much more scared. So I don't know. I just admire you, Paige. Like that's all I'm trying to say, dog. Like the fact that you out here running around with film, like with a fucking Bolaflex on you, like you just doing it, and I'm just like, yo, pass me that Canon 5D Mark 88. You know, like pass it over. But no, yeah, I appreciate what you said, Michael, and yeah, it's I feel like it's just really hard to be a filmmaker, you know, because you're playing a different instrument, but it's also something that everybody wants to participate in, you know, or at least view. It's like the closest thing I feel like I can get to music.
The aspect of what you've all been saying too is we go maybe deeper into the thread of rage and of identity and what that calls up, right? I think that maybe the beautiful thing about this forum in particular, but also the forum of say filmmaking from a personal filmmaking perspective. My own I showed my movie Commodity Trading. And that movie, I really haven't spoken very much about my own film work on this podcast. Always thinking of it from a perspective of like, oh, that's not necessarily part of what this conversation is about, but at the same time, like it is what this conversation is about. And so that movie really deeply confronts my own self and like what I'd gone through in my life, especially from 2015 to 2022, and seeing like the dissolution of the semblance of order that I may have had in my own personal life, but I don't ever think it was actually there. With this sort of like hyperreal spectacle at its like pimple popping moment, right? But also thinking of like how that hyperpolitical state that folks say may have just become aware of in 2016 was just like the head of a pimple, and that there was an underlying infection that is there to anybody who is coming from a non-white perspective in particular. And as the sole person in my family, as I was growing up with white privilege that was given, by a man who essentially wasn't there for my mother, who left her when she was pregnant as a Latina. My own kind of understanding of what I was and my own identity, it was something that only came in the form of the realization of it only came in the form of deep bullying and trauma, and then that developed into my own form of rage, and I became a drug addict at 14, and became obsessed with figuring out ways to erase myself and to do what I saw the tactic was in my own family, which was to assimilate as much as possible and to figure out what that assimilation essentially was. And what the assimilation was like a copying process, a copying of a filmic identity, a media personality, etc. I think that the aspect of analog that I begin to like say Venn diagram with you, Paige, is in that I started to feel like there was like a massage that every single media had. So every media kind of felt as though it made me feel a different level of either comfort or discomfort or this false nostalgia or whatever it might be. And then with 16 millimeter, it was the idea that I could pass that thing through the camera again and again and try to oversaturate its existence, its meanings. Like I could maybe gather something through multiple perspectives, maybe find something that was more imminent through its own, say, lacking of function, or lacking of function as like a ground for a diegetic space of reality that one could instead encompass. But it was more that it was also a form of like a false simulation of what it's like to be on a dissociative anesthetic trip, of what it's like to be inside of a media drug, and why do that? Why use the media as a drug, which it often is. Um, as somebody who is Latino, but also as somebody who is the father of a Black daughter, I've had the experience of seeing and being adjacent to, of passing and seeing white supremacy on the level of one who also has white privilege. And it's a it's only like a horrifying window at times, and I think that is the means by which I operate the camera as well. It's like this horrifying window, and so not to expand upon the dreariness, but rather to only speak about it in that sense. It's also the this form of identity that you're speaking of, and how it's, say, maybe given a positive through one's continued investment within that specificity, right? Of trying to attempt to distill some kind of meaning and significance through structures of negation, that at the very least we're found in a moment of having to recognize the way in which we all suffer individually, and yet also suffer as a means of the sort of compression of identity that especially white patriarchy seems to thrive on.
I was just going to say, definitely check out Commodity Trading if you guys haven't seen Michael's film. It's incredible. And yeah, it really gets to these underlying questions about the media's role in these traumas, and what he describes as the numb spiral, which I feel like is connected to the point Sonnie was making about collaging media textures also. And I don't know if you've seen Guillotine, but yeah, you both would be interested in each other's work. And then kind of a general point about film diary and the nature of filmmaking as a tool for dealing with trauma and dealing with like filmmaking as therapy or whatever. Yeah, that's another piece of what we're trying to do, is create these safe, comfortable places where people can show work that was made from a vulnerable place, and not have it put into these film world contexts that just create uncomfortable environments.
I'd like to say something. I think it's interesting hearing the words comfort and discomfort come up, or yeah, even the question of I guess art therapy or art as therapy. Especially, I teach a lot of freshmen, and I see it mostly in my freshmen, like this desire for um, yeah, like a joining of art and therapy, and it comes out in interesting ways sometimes in their work. But I think as far as the I think I'm maybe suspicious of work, certain works providing catharsis. I think, and catharsis for who? There's a really fantastic interview with Jill Godmillow, and I forget her first name, but her last name is Shapiro. And in it, she talks about documentary as a not only as a form but as a feeling. Documentary being something that, or the standard we understand or think about documentary film, in that it provides closure. It sort of lets people either congratulate themselves for caring about something for 2 hours and then leaving, and then having that feel as though they've taken action, and then or that they can claim a kind of responsibility or accountability for caring because they watched it. And so I think, yeah, I'm definitely thinking about different themes in my work, but I think I'm still suspicious of closure, or suspicious of um, uh, at least my work in like specifically like having healing powers, because I think I hear that come up quite a bit in some Q&As of like a work having healed somebody, but I think that maybe is code for they've been provided closure because they've been given 10 minutes to say, I've watched a film about a Black person and now I've done good for the day. And so I think, yeah, I'm a little wary of thinking about comfort in my films. And that's not to say that I don't enjoy or don't think that it's necessary, but I think, and there's a time and a place. And then of course a maker and a viewer that I hope is, or it's a mutual exchange or whatever. But I think with my work specifically, and all these other works about identity and trauma, inherited politics, inherited trauma, etc., I'm wary of providing comfort. Maybe that makes me sound like a bad person. I don't want you to be comfortable, but yeah, I think especially because I hear it a lot in student critiques of, oh, this film was relatable, this film was comfortable, and I don't know if I always want that from certain material.
Yeah. Do you feel like as a filmmaker, do you find like do you get comfort out of your films, or like closure out of your films?
No, I hope not. I think because that's how I continue to ask questions, is like having a film that's an open end. Like I think that also comes from making short works, but one film brings up, my mom tells a story about me and my sister, and now I can have a film with my sister, and she talks about my dad, and now I can have a film about like they're all sort of connected in that way in this really large, spider web, and it feels Sisyphean, but I think that is part of I like that's why they call it a practice. Like it's always asking, for me anyways, always asking the question of, well, yeah, she brought up this, and maybe the story is over, but how do I now think about her in this way, or my mom or my sister, or the stuff she's talking about? Like I don't think it'll ever stop. Like I think that's part of the joy, is then like asking the next question. So yeah, I don't think my films they don't really give me comfort. I think maybe, I don't know. I know when they're done. I can tell when a film is finished, but I don't know if that's from comfort. I think it's maybe from something else.
Yeah. I I asked that because well, one step back. I was thinking about your students also, and like you said, like relatable and stuff like that, and just thinking about like universities and high schools, like similar socioeconomic positions, right? Do you think they feel like maybe it's not comfort, but do you think like they probably just feel like akin to it or like familiar? Like they all kind of have like this a similar like base understanding of familiarity and like it's comfortable.
What do you mean? Familiarity with
Well,
filmmaking or?
with like when they see one of their peers' work.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I think a word that I hear a lot is relatability. Oh, I like this film because I related to it. I like this whatever edit because it's relatable. They can see themselves in something. And I think that's necessary, and it comes up a lot. And that's fine. But I don't know if that is the reason a film should be good to them, is because they see themselves in it. I think it's also, and you have to practice. I mean, I think this is part of my job, is teaching not taste, but an appreciation for material that has nothing to do with you, like understanding how to watch films that aren't about your positionality, that aren't about your concerns in the world, not because they're not important, but because everyone's are important, give or take. I don't know if everybody, but many people, that share similar concerns or whatever. So I think, when they say that, I think they're seeing themselves in the material, but I also think that comes from sometimes not being challenged by watching stuff. And I think a challenge is necessary. A challenge is good, both in the material, like the content, like what it's about, or how it's made. Because I do get pushback of things where they can't see themselves in it, and then therefore it's bad. And I think that's part of the journey. But they have a long way to go. There's a long way to go, and it's my job to take them through it, at least partway.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I taught for like a little bit, like I just TA'd and also taught like some high school students, and like they I think my students were just kind of mean. They were just like, "Yo, this is boring, dog," and I was like, "Yo, I'm sorry, dog. Y'all want to watch Belly?" You know what I mean? I was like, "What do I do?" But like, but they were always on their phones.
I was gonna say I graduated last year and I took a lot of writing courses, and that was the number one word that would always come up during critique, is most of us just had to say that somebody's work was relatable. And I do think that that's a combination of us not being able to articulate our thoughts on the piece, and also that honestly our brains don't work anymore because of Instagram. Like I really find it hard to kind of pay attention to anything that I can't relate to anymore. My brain just won't allow me to go. That's probably really bad to say, but I'm being honest. It's very hard to focus and pay attention. And I don't know, like I think somebody earlier was talking about just like the endless doom scrolling, and just the media has definitely, I think, fucked a lot of art. Period. I'm just like seeing a lot of the same themes being repeated in everybody's work. I was actually talking with Sage and said that I don't know if I should say this. I was saying how I can watch a film and tell either when the person made it based on the themes that are in it because it was a trend, or I can tell like what they were inspired by, particular, like kind of have Tumblr brain. Like I can see where a lot of people pull their references from. Not everybody, but there's like there's a huge lack of originality, unfortunately, I think. Did I take this? Is this okay? Sorry. Yeah. I don't know.
No,
that's right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel that in a lot of ways, and like, I mean, that's like, I mean, we spent like 2 years on Instagram.
Oh yeah, the pandemic. Oh my god, the pandemic melted my brain.
Yeah,
and then getting COVID twice has definitely destroyed my memory. on top of SSRIs, which contributed to the destruction of my memory. So
I know the vibes. I know the vibes. And like to like have like to be on Instagram for like 2 straight years, right? And then someone's like, "Yo, read this like 2-page essay." You're like, "Wait, what?" Because it's like everything's like reading to us. You know what I mean? Like even like I think it's like the like how people are adding accessibility like language to films now too, whereas like it's like yes accessibility, but then it's also like TikTok also talks to you, in a very like it's all like swashed around in a very odd way, I think. And just hearing like, oh, is this relatable? It's like it's also like content. Like so like my day job is like being a strategist in advertising, right? And in through that experience, like someone was I watched this video on YouTube by this Goldman Sachs guy. He was like, no jargon. For
mm,
optimal client service, no jargon. Because if people don't know what it is, they feel stupid.
mhm.
Right? So like if that's like the basis of optimal client service in the marketing and advertising world, then the content that these people everyone is getting is at that intellectual place of like fifth grade. Like I like when I would write things, it would be like if it was more than 3 syllables, I would omit it.
Mm.
But then you have like it's simultaneously you have a visual understanding, and then you're like, okay, like, oh, I'm looking at this thing and it's talking to me and it's 1 syllable each word. It's like you don't even have to think about it anymore.
Mhm.
Like you don't like, there's no need to persuade, right? Because you're just like, oh, this feels right. It's simple, it's logical, it's done. It's done. But um similar like I don't know, I feel I'm just very all right, I'm gonna stop playing. I just feel very worried for the art world. I'm very, very concerned for the art world.
Wait,
Because
why
it's
just the art world though?
no, because the art world, it feels like this auxiliary world of like unregulatory just luxury. And it's in this weird space of like immortality, right? So like when Paige was talking about like the open-endedness to the films and stuff, I was actually like in my mind, I was like, oh, like that's interesting because my brain doesn't think like that. Because like I want to close everything. Like when I made that film about my family, I was like, oh, finally, if every like I'm always under the impression like my entire family's gonna die, right? Because they live in the inner city. I'm nervous. They don't I know what they eat. I know what's in the freezer. Like I know their zip code. So like I have this like so like this determinate understanding in my head of like their health, you know? So for me, I'm like, okay, capture now. And then I'll capture again maybe later, but at least as long as I do it now, I'm like, okay, because I feel like I've adopted the skills of like a luxury trade while also just trying to be a regular person. So I'm like artistically archiving and making home movies of like a very conceptual level while simultaneously being like, hey, child of mine, this is your grandmother. This is when I came back from college. Because it's operating in more than one space for me,
Mm.
in a way that's like wrapped up in like first generation upward mobility, and then like trying to explain myself to this like alien baby thing one day that's like, what the fuck is who are you? I'm like, bro, this is who I was. You know what I mean? Like here's a track record, you know what I'm saying? But like I've always thought about making art like making albums, you know and I think there's a generation, or at least like like I talked to my buddy Zora, and he like listens to Freddie Gibbs a lot and stuff like that. Like I love the kind of like the container. Like I love a good container. And like as Paige was talking about like an open container, I was like, close it, please. Just close it. Because like I've learned that like when I watch films, I'm just kind of like, if it's open ended, I just get wrapped up in the search. You know, I like a little bit more certainty in like a finish, even if it's bad. It can be it can be Birth of a Nation. It can be like an ending, and I'm like, oh, it's ended. You know, but if I'm watching wait, what like the Heisenberg, like the Breaking Bad joint, where he's like, is he dead? Is he dead? He got to be dead. You know, I'm like, is it? Are we gonna do another one? You know, but with all of that being said, it's like I feel like we were once in the age of TV and like structure and like things being closed, and like the art world like gives us the opportunity to like think and go off in different ways, and we can actually like consider and be critical around these things. But then we're up against the tech industry, and I don't think that, at least within the art world, or like at least some of the conversations we're having, is like, what does disruption look like for us? You know, like what happens when chat gpt and ai and all those things do that? Like we can read like technological slavery and marshall mcluhan, walter benjamin, and all that jazz, but then it's like, fundamentally, like economically, like how is this going to affect us? Because I feel like the artists next to the scientists are kind of the last humanity, the last frontier of like life sciences. You know, when it comes down to like the humanities and science, is like, how do we communicate? But then we go to our classes and teach, and they're like, man, throwing that old money aesthetic on TikTok. And I'm like, no, come on, man. Get off the top. You know, then Chinese government, I don't know what's happening there. I was watching PBS the other day. I'm scared. I just don't know. I don't know. You know, but yeah, that's my long-winded rant about disruption and AI and shit, because I don't know.
I think that really speaks to the comfort level, though, right? Like, my feeling is that I was primed in many ways to be an addict by constructive elements that were in the media that I was using in order to medicate myself from being myself, because what I was potentially too complex of a container that I was being given as an explainer of a container, right? Like as a particular prototype as to what I was supposed to be. And given all of the things that we refer to as, say, disabilities, or refer to as intersectionalities, or whatever the hell it might be, right? That container did not allow for there to be a perfectly organic within this society, or within whatever the frameworks of a political reality I was living in, a comfortable state. And so I sought a comfort through a negation, and that negation was a story fabricated so as to have a lot of tangents reduced, made simple, compressed. And in some ways that has become complicated, but it is still reduced somehow to the pleasure principle of simply getting a hit and then feeling a withdrawal, and then needing a hit again and then getting withdrawal. Like, that seems to still follow a narrative structure. And so it kind of creates like a wave situation where it's like a constant elevation and dip, and an elevation and dip. And that seems to also be the way in which the technology, or even the form of marketing, um, uh, works, right? Everything needs to be new, but that new needs to be like it was before. And that will only bring us back into the sort of these hills and valleys of false epiphanies, of false revelations. I used to use the word transcendent, and now I feel awful, like even thinking in these terms, because it's like, what was transcendent? What, right? And speaking of what Paige was talking about, was like, oh, maybe there was a way in which this sort of media container could transcend, or like I could transcend from it. But it's very much an enlightenment sort of vocabulary to think about the way in which one was using the container of a negation to begin with, right? Yet at the same time, I also feel really strongly about what you were talking about with music in the album, Sonnie. And so there's maybe like this very strange, like maybe hypocrisy in what we do as artists in general, but like what we seem to chase in the pursuit of making an art that could potentially be that humanity, whatever that is, or could potentially be that medium by which we can get at something at its core. Yet at the same time, I think it's always elusive, as Paige is stating. And so I'm very very concerned about the same things that you are. I'm more concerned about the way in which art is going because of the way in which artists have become more, let's say, in tune to a sort of visual analysis that allows them to repeat or to copy a trend that becomes more and more specific, and that because of that trend becoming more specific, it allows for one to scale their own sort of like complicated political structures as a means of getting into, or a means of navigating, a form of popularity that's no different than what you deal with in high school. And that high school level BS is still embedded in the structures of any form of art. And even when that, let's say, those elements of the social are using complicated languages, the complicated languages that are oftentimes forged by academia, and even if it's forged by academia for a purpose that we deem virtuous, or espouses a particular principle that we like agree with on that human level, right? That it seems as though it's being used and it's being co-opted constantly for the sake of a sort of capital. Because isn't popularity a sort of capital? Isn't like the idea of viewership, the idea of like appealing in at all a form of capital? And so I begin to like someone who's always been, let's say, on an outsider level, like the kid who's kicked off the lunch tables and shit. Like I've always felt both a deep suspicion of all forms of mediated comfort and all forms of social fun, or whatever it is to be fun, or whatever it is to fit in. Because I'd never have found that in any way represents to me a concrete reality. It was more of an illusion based in a nostalgia that's constantly forming.
Yeah. I just want to make a quick point on what you said about academia and the language. I mean, I feel like it's no like it's, I don't know, like I feel like the mystery of the art world is like, how smart are we? You know what I mean? Like it's just like, it's like so complicated in a lot of ways, and like I had an adverse reaction to it, and like I learned it all, and I was like, okay, let's do it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like just the language of the world, but like once I got out of that and like, went to advertising and marketing and stuff like that, I started looking up all these statistics of like reading levels, right? And like I think it was like Louisiana or Mississippi, where they were like, take the reading level of a population and then try to extrapolate that data to the amount of sales to make in their prison. You know? Or like how, like I pulled it up, is like 6% of like 12th grade black boys are reading at a proficient level, while only 1% are reading at an advanced level. So it's like, it's, I don't know, for me, like the whole high school shit is like real. It's like, it's weirdly real for me in a way where it's like, okay, like in order to fit in, I got to talk like this, but then I can't bring more people with me because they gonna get laughed at. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's a very like perverse system of success, but I don't know. I think I just said out loud my like secret plan. Just like bring up education levels, literacy rates as soon as possible. Because it's like, I don't know. I don't know. I just tend to worry now when I see like there's a reason why why like the system is the way it is, of course, but like I don't know how to compete with Lil Baby as an artist. No, I'm like for real. You know what I mean? Like how do we bridge that gap within popular culture and fine art? Like I feel like there is a gap there, and like what we deem as like art as well. But I feel like Lil Baby is like incredible. You know, I think The Weeknd's incredible. I think Drake is incredible, right? But like I don't know. I feel like there's something to say about like one mass media and how effective it is, and to learn something from it. But I don't know. That's a hot take. I know that's a hot take.
I didn't know where you're going till the end, and now I kind of feel you on that, and I guess that's why I call it media drug manufacturing, right? Because it's like the method by which it's distributed, the method by which it's ingested. The question is, really, is there any form of it that is more or less of a negation if you're working within the composition of a negation to begin with?
I wish I was better at articulating my thoughts.
Same. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just my brain's all over the place. It was, my mom has a third grade education. She stopped going to school in third grade, and she's from the 80s, so she had a learning disability. And basically, back then in New York, the teachers would just tell you that you were stupid and you were going to never do anything with your life. And so she just was like, all right, fine, and stopped going to school. So I was raised by somebody who, you know, wasn't formally educated at all, doesn't have a high school diploma. And then I went to school in New York, and then moved to Jersey when I was 13, Central Jersey, where these kids were like way ahead of me, like had learned shit that I should have known but didn't. And it took years to catch up, and I still feel, I mean, very behind. And I guess just like trying to tie this into what you said about, I don't know, I guess accessibility and oh geez, oh god, hold on, sorry. And like the art world kind of like, for me, I feel like it's split into like, in New York especially, like the academics, and then like the popular assholes that are like basically it girls on Instagram, or it people on Instagram that are also in the art world and get opportunities because of their following, and then like wanting to be on both of those ends. And I don't know. I can't. Sorry if I'm like all over
No,
the
no,
place.
no.
You know
Go
what
ahead.
I'm
Go
trying
ahead.
to say? Can somebody help me like put my thoughts together? Just like wanting to keep my art accessible, but also wanting to kind of get better and further advance myself, but like not knowing. I don't know. All that somewhere. It's there. Sorry.
That's all legitimate. No, everything that's said is valid.
I'm not very good at tying up things. What are you gonna say?
Going back to Paige's point about conclusions, and and I think that's connected to the conversation about comfort and just the way that Paige mentioned, like with her students, there is a level of discomfort that you need to be willing to put yourself through as an audience member to experience a work. But then also like what Sonnie was talking about with the changing film language through the internet, social media shit, and how it becomes inaccessible if you're not like somewhat speaking the language of what has become our visual language, even if it is this dumbed down thing. So it's like kind of like, how do you bridge the two? I don't know. I'm always like most inspired by work that seems to be challenging, but also like understanding of where people are at as viewers in this day and age. And yeah, also I'm also all over the place, all right. But also to the conversation about comfort and discomfort. When I was speaking about our like comfort for the audience, I was thinking about like a filmmaker who we showed, who's a rape survivor, and the film was about their own rape. So like, there's this dichotomy where the work itself is extremely uncomfortable, but the more uncomfortable the work is, the more care has to be given to creating a comfortable environment for the audience. In terms of um, like she said, she wasn't comfortable showing the film in a lot of settings, and she felt comfortable in our the environment that we had created. Um, so yeah, I'm just thinking about like comfort and also uh, where we're at in terms of like changing visual language and how to keep pushing the language of experimental film forward while also like not um, being so having it in this place where like you need an education to understand it. And like, because at its core this type of filmmaking has the least boundaries. Anyone with a camera can make a film about their own life. So how to like keep it at that, but also like push the language forward. And yeah, those are questions that we think about.
I think I come back to what Paige was saying before about how a work is a constant practice and how that practice is always open-ended, and not even like as you were saying, Paige, it's not like let's say in the terms of a particular narrative, because the narrative itself is a containing device for that which actually exists in a far more nebulous or far more infinite sort of ground. And I mean that by saying that essentially we can use a certain amount of senses to try and contain the totality of what it is that we're, say, filming, recording, or trying to convey. And yet at the same time, the thing itself takes on a structurelessness that our brain or the capturing device itself applies to the world, right? From the standpoint of consciousness as well. I think that there's like this strange relation between the pop cultural and the highfalutin art stuff, and where I'm becoming really scared, I guess, is the way in which, because of the superfluous, or maybe it's like kind of like a Baroque tendency to internet forms of like a constantly circulating form that gathers more and more variations, that we're, say, confusing that sometimes with the lack of containment or the boundlessness of the things that may at first glance be recognizable as mundane, because we're starting to essentially collapse this constantly generating nothing machine that is what I call the digital sickness, but whatever it is, the representation of an internet form, let's say, and the endless dialogue that goes back and forth that generates nothing and different variations of that nothing. with a being that can in itself be referred to as boring to the point of uncomfortable. I also find that like pushing one's comfort levels is only something that one is willing to do if there's clout involved. Like a certain amount of clout will allow one to suspend one's discomfort about something, but it seems rather selfish and narcissistic and nihilistic. I don't know like where I went there, but rather these are concerns that I have, and where Paige was voicing something that I think is quite valid and actually really, really beautifully stated, is that a level of discomfort should come from our inability to completely encapsulate everything. And I maybe actually find more comfort in that than discomfort sometimes. Actually, we've gotten to that part in the show where we go around and we say, hey, do you have something that you would like to add as a closing statement? I didn't even realize what time it was. I am going to start with you, Paige, and then we'll go around. And please, you can speak at length or as briefly as you'd like. But please tell us what you're thinking.
Oh, sorry. There was some lag on my end, but yes, yeah. Last thoughts, last comments. I think this has been interesting. I mean, it's always, I think, a lot to hear about how your work is perceived and how your thoughts about your work are perceived and or reflected or not reflected. And I think, yeah, conversation is one of those places where that happens. Yeah, where there's space for that to happen.
I love that. And I think that conversation should never be taken out of the context of practice and art practice as well, but potentially simply just a practice that occurs at each point in which consciousness is working with other consciousness. Sonnie?
Yeah, I want to say thank you to everybody for sure. I really appreciate it. It's great to see everybody too. But yeah, I kind of, a lot of takeaways in it is just like, even though like, I don't know, I feel like even though I like have my gripes with the art world, as like one does, right? It's like not perfect. No world is perfect, right? But I feel like it's the one place where we can like actually like consider and like question things in a way that you can't do in any other capacity. Um, at least for me, it's always been my practice has always been like a freeing space. So it's good to like just some of the stuff I'm talking about is to have baked ideas in my process right now, in my practice. And I appreciate y'all like helping me think through some of those things because I feel so preoccupied. I just got out of corporate America, so it's like, oh, so many unlearnings are occurring at one time. So, yeah, I appreciate it and learnings. Yeah, thank you.
I will one day tell everybody about how I was making virtual reality for Meta at one point. That's something. Yeah. And Sage.
Thank you so much for having us. It's really an honor to be in conversation with all of you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
that was
so
an
much,
ugly laugh.
so much to think about. I need to like watch this back and process everything.
I
but
will not be watching this back. I am traumatized. No, I'm joking. I definitely need to think more about a lot of things. And I would also love to meet everybody in Chicago and actually type. I promise I have a brain. It's in there. I can think and speak and sorry, my cat is running away.
Yeah, and good luck with everything going on in Chicago. Good luck with Onion City. Super excited to see how that goes. Everything you're doing is amazing.
Honestly, all of this is it means a lot to me. Being able to bring people who like I've heard about and had never gotten the privilege to speak to before, but then also getting to bring people, who have history with and who constantly drive my own thinking. And I also know that when you're put into a position where your thoughts are being recorded and you're also like having to distill and think about the half baked, as you were talking about, aspects of one's practice. Actually, no, I find that this was extraordinary. That all of you spoke at a level and were really truthful. Now, of course, not to ponder down that rabbit hole, but really genuine in your approach to this conversation. And so that to me means quite a lot. There's effort I found from every participant. And with that being said, what I do to end this program is I just say bye.